my work has really been focused on the idea of design for a long time. And I know in learning sciences we talk a lot about design-based research, design experiments, and getting into the whole problem of design. The program that I graduated from was really one that focused on systems theory and the systemic design of instruction. But over time, that started to erode a bit as people started to say, you know what, this is not really what we're doing. We have some sort of linear process for making things that teach people stuff, and they started to reevaluate that considerably, and that kind of paralleled the rise of the learning sciences a couple decades ago, I'd say. So I was influenced a lot, like a lot of people, by my colleague at Wisconsin, Jim Gee, who's now in Arizona. And he wrote a book that many of you may have read, and if you didn't, I recommend it. What Video Games Have to Teach Us About Literacy and Learning. So just like the not-so-parsimonious title, he had in that book a list of 36 different learning principles that he thought were characteristics of good games that parallel characteristics of very effective learning environments. So myself and other people have tried to sort of boil that down a little bit and try to get at what are the really cool elements of games when we think about learning and the design of learning environments. So one of them, of course, is fantasy, or narrative, or story. So we're human beings, and human beings are storytellers. We're interested in stories about the past. We're interested in imagining alternative futures. We're interested in the conflicts that we have over and over and over again. And so when fantasy or story or narrative comes into a learning environment, it becomes a little bit more powerful. Another one is leveling systems. So leveling systems are all around us. You know, you're an assistant professor, and then you're an associate professor, and then you're a professor, and then you're a distinguished professor, and then you're an endowed chair, and then you're a platinum gold super powerful professor. But leveling systems are all around us. And leveling systems are highly motivating because everybody wants to get to the next level. I want to get from being a white belt to a blue belt to a purple belt to a brown belt to a black belt. And at each level, there's increasing privilege and prestige and power at each of these levels. There's also access to secrets, okay? And so many of our structures and organizations borrow this. Scouting is famous for badging with, again, increasing levels and rewards that show privilege, prestige, and power in some way. The next thing, though, is identity play. And that means pretending to be someone that you're not and trying to see the world through the lens of someone else. Trying on a different set of lenses that David Schaefer calls new epistemic frames of reference, which means that for a little while you pretend to see the world in a new way. Watch very young children play, and you'll see that they do this all the time. All of a sudden, I am the cook. And now I say cook-like things. And I use cook tools. And I move in a cook-like way. Now I am a policeman, so now I'm going to say police things, and I'm going to use police tools. And I'm now seeing the world for a short time. I'm trying on this different way of seeing the world. That's identity play. Now, games are also very, very compelling because they're very, very good at getting the sweet spot of the level of the person who's engaged in the tasks at hand, in the work. The zone of proximal development. You're in that zone where if it's too easy, what happens? You get bored and you don't want to play anymore. You don't want to do this thing anymore. Whether that's school or a game or anything else, it's too easy, it becomes boring. And of course, if it's too difficult, it's frustrating. And again, the person disengages. And that's related to things being developmentally appropriate and age appropriate. The other thing that games do well is they allow you to discover new things. Discover new things. You can go out and explore and, oh, aha, hey, there's something kind of cool in here. Oh, wait, here's something else. Hey, yeah, let me explore that. Learning is inherently pleasurable. And so when we're in an environment where we discover something, we feel a little bit of a thrill there. That, of course, has survival value. Discovery is something that games do very well, and effective learning environments do too. The other is membership in affinity groups. So this image, by the way, is from some card game competitions. But this means forging alliances with people who share a common expert practice. They share tools, they share strategies, they share discoveries, they share enthusiasm, and they bond over this activity. A lot of you may have read Levin Wanger's Legitimate Peripheral Participation, and that very compelling work on tailors in Liberia, and the notion of communities of practice. And the other thing is testing trajectories, which means you can try something over and over and over and over again. You can rehearse. So playing a video game, you can live your life over and over and over again. In a lot of video games, you die, right? You try something and you're killed by an alligator or something, and then you come back and oh, I shouldn't step on that because there's an alligator there, and I could try it over and over and over and over again. Of course, we can't do that in real life, like in Groundhog Day, but in designed experiences or designed environments, we can. So there's a couple other things related to these that are not part of the 7, but one of them, of course, is action. The other related to the idea of narrative are heroes. And something else is cartoon violence, which is exciting. It's not real violence, right? But cartoon violence. Like here you have Discord, who's sort of an evil character in My Little Pony. A hugely popular franchise, by the way, if you're not familiar with it. But that's a cartoon violence that adds excitement and interest in the narrative of the stories and situating games. So there's many, many, many examples of these all over the place. This is a game called My Horse. Did anybody play My Horse? I got so addicted to this thing, it was really scandalous. But this is a phone-based app, and in this thing you take care of a horse, okay? And you begin by sort of, brushing off its mane or something, and you have to feed it and take it out for walks. And as you take care of the horse over the course of time, you start to become sort of emotionally invested in your horse. The horse grows, you get access to other equipment, and before you know it, you're trying to unlock all kinds of things so that you could progress to higher levels. A very, very simple idea, but tremendously compelling and engaging. I know a bunch of things about horses that I wouldn't otherwise know because of this ridiculously addictive game. Of course, many of you are familiar with other more popular and video games like World of Warcraft. So in World of Warcraft, you take on a new identity. And that identity, you begin with certain kinds of characteristics. Other players take on other identities that they call different classes, different races with different expertise. And you then get on a trajectory where you grow that character over time. This is a screenshot from that game that's a little bit old, but as you can see, there are all these little images there. And anybody know what any of these are? I know every single one. But the reason I know every single one is not, of course, because I memorized a list, but rather because that was important for doing something that I cared a lot about in a particular time. And I had to make use of that. So in the world of education, people have noticed this for some time, and people have been trying to engage complicated issues using games. A nice example is the Global Conflicts series. So what they do is they take different conflicts around the world, different wars, and you play through different scenarios to try to engage the complexity related to the real-life conflict. This particular one was Global Conflicts Palestine. This is done by a company in Denmark, by the way. And what you do is you play the role of a journalist, right? And you're making lots of fake news or something. But anyway, you develop relationships as a journalist with different sides or different constituencies in the conflict. And when you develop those relationships, you move up in status with that particular group. And then that group is more friendly to you, and they give you increasing access to more information. The problem, though, is that as you do that, you get in trouble with other constituencies, right? So here you can see friendliness between two of the sides here, and it increases for one and decreases for another. So I'm kind of simplifying it here, but it tries to work on the idea of complexity by creating a complex environment that you can test trajectories with through taking on the identity of an actor in a story. Another very interesting one was called Tactical Iraqi. So, Defense Department, they got all the big money, so they can do all the cool stuff, right? Before we get it. In this game, and this game was made by the Department of Defense specifically for U.S. service personnel going to Iraq when large numbers were going for the war there. And in the game, you take on the character of somebody who is trying to develop relationships with Iraqis for the purpose of mission-related things. The idea was that they didn't want to just get people who would show up and break down doors and shoot people and blow up buildings, but rather would try to develop relationships. So I worked on Quest Atlantis for a number of years with Sasha Barab and others, and we were trying to do something like this by creating different scenarios in the form of quests that a child, it was sort of middle school focused, a child could take on an identity that they build over time by engaging in different activities. And this all was situated in a story about a mythical world that children in this world access by way of a virtual environment. So we went to many different countries with Quest Atlantis, Australia, Denmark, Malaysia, Singapore, a number of different places. And this was a shot from Malaysia. But as we did that, we started to realize that culture was a huge part of making sense of all of this. This, by the way, was the Van Gogh bedroom that you could walk into, and then you encounter these spinning discs where the quests are, and then a virtual agent comes up and sends you on your way. More recently, esports have taken off. This is not such a big thing in the US, but this is massively huge in Asia. This is a shot of one of the, that's not a very good shot, but it's one of the major competitions there, and about 100,000 people participate in this. These are television events. These are events that people come to stadiums to watch. Again, we don't see this in the US, but it's very, very big in South Korea and in Southeast Asia and in China. So people have taken games and they've tried to incorporate some of these things into different kinds of corporate structures. This is a gamification attempt by Nike. There's another with Starbucks. But a big concern with all of this is how culturally relevant is all of this. And I would say also how relevant is it to our actual circumstances. So of course we live in Chicago, and we all know that in Chicago there's a real problem of violence, crime, inequality, and so forth. So this is your likelihood of being imprisoned in your life. So if you happen to be a white woman, your chance of going to prison is about 1 in 111. If you're a black woman, it's 1 in 18, and so forth. So for a black man like myself, I've got like a 1 in 3 shot of going to prison, and I don't know, 1, 2, somebody's going, right? It's a serious problem. And so how can we not be concerned with doing whatever we can in our design work, in our work as educators, for trying to impact this in some way? All right, so about 3 years ago, I was still at North Carolina, and I had a conversation with a friend of mine who was director of the Center for Cybersecurity Research. And he said, well, Mike, tell me about what you're doing. And I was talking about games and design and children. And he says, we really don't pay attention to children at all in this center. But if you have an idea of something to do with kids, we have an annual event that's next week in our center, and we invite people from industry and from the National Science Foundation, and they come in, and we have a day-long symposium, and we invite people here at the university, and these were all people in engineering, and they pitch ideas for new understandings of cybersecurity and coding and so forth. And he says, why don't you pitch an idea? Do you have any ideas? And I said, I think I might. He said, okay, but look, this is not education where you guys blather on about a whole lot of stuff. You get 5 minutes. 5 minutes, you're off the stage. You get 1 slide. You get 1 slide, 5 minutes, and I want you to fill out a form. The form was 1 page, and you could ask for $50,000 or $100,000. Give us your idea in a short paragraph, and there were a couple of little things to fill in. And he says, give me that, and we'll see if we could put you on the docket. So anyway, it worked out, and I did my presentation. Mine was the last of the day. They didn't tell me when I was going to go. Mine was the very last of the day, and everybody was an engineer except me. So I come in, hey guys, in education, I have an idea for games. So I talk about the games, and I had an idea for, it was called Cyber Threat Burglar, and I created some screenshots of what it might look like, and the idea is that you would create a town that has structures in the town with buildings that correspond to how a network is put together. So then when you try to get into one, you can see the relationships to other buildings, so you have an idea how somebody's network is laid out. And you play the role of a burglar who's trying to unlock doors in these different buildings. So anyway, so I pitched that, and they said, wow, you know, we kind of like the idea, but this really seems a little strange. And the NSF person said, you know, we really don't like games at NSF. I was like, what are you talking about? But anyway, that's what she said. And they did not fund me, but they said you should maybe try something else. So I took the idea of cybersecurity and the problem of things like phishing attacks, and I married that idea with card games. Okay, so as many of you know, card games, like video games, are intensely popular, but they're a lot cheaper to make, they're a lot easier to make, and again, they're intensely popular. When we first did the Quest Atlantis work, we did a lot of ethnographic work with kids, and one of the things we found, they loved cards. So we printed some cards. There was no game involved in that, but we had trading cards. But now, there are many, many games. Again, My Little Pony, see, big franchise. The biggest franchise, by the way, in the world right now is Pokemon. It's bigger than Star Trek. It's bigger than Star Wars. Pokemon #1. But anyway, card games are intensely popular. Kids play them all the time. You can print them quickly. Why not make a game for learning cybersecurity, not only because it matches or corresponds with this interest that kids have in games, but also because the habits of mind of trying to exploit weaknesses and go back and forth, cat and mouse, an adversarial relationship with an opponent, it matches very well. So if I'm trying to hack a network, I want to do things that people don't see. I want to kind of mask my activity. I want to take back doors to password protected areas and so forth. And this might work very well for cybersecurity. So I wrote a grant from the National Science Foundation in the Safe and Secure Cyberspace program. Originally I wanted to go to iTest, or one of the ones that is more commonly associated with education, but there was a little more space with the cybersecurity people because there's fewer people who are trying to do educational things. A lot of people are doing, you know, basic research or Internet of Things and that kind of thing. So at the time, I only had the idea of making a game. It would have characters on cards, animate beings that could be members in a story of some sort. There are other games out there that that try to teach a variety of content, but it should be connected to some kind of story, mythical characters. There should be leveling. It should be a collectible card game, which means that you collect cards over time, and it should be a deck building game. Some of you might play Magic or something like that, where you assemble a deck over time, and then that deck matches a particular gaming strategy that you have in order to win, basically. I didn't have the cybersecurity expertise. I didn't really have the game design expertise. I didn't have the artistic talent. I only had the idea, but this is a huge plug for interdisciplinarity. So I partnered with the computer science department here. I asked Venkatakrishnan if he would join. He said no. He didn't think it was interesting. Now he thinks it's interesting. But I'm working with Rigel Jamomo, who teaches cybersecurity there, and some game design people that I know around the country. And we started working on the game. We partnered with schools, and we started by playing an existing card game called Cyber Threat Defender with the kids, just to see what would happen. You know, what happens when we play with 10, 11, 12-year-olds, these different games. And we learned a lot about that and slowly started to create cards. These are my cards, by the way. The game now has 99 cards. And what we did is we mocked it up in InDesign, and that generates PDFs. We then cut them up, and you can get these card covers at any hobby store, and put a stiffener in there, a regular playing card, and got one of these. So I still haven't bought a paper cutter on the grant. I don't know why not. But anyway, so we have different families of cards. There's software, malware, demon cards. There's social phishing cards. There's social whaling cards. You know, phishing attacks, that's where somebody sends you an email and says, hey, what's up? You know. But then another one is a whaling card, and that might name you particularly because they're after a big fish, and that's a whale. So they are usually a lot more clever, a lot more deceptive, and they try to do things like get your password or install malicious software and so forth. There's software script cards. There's instruction path and compiled cards. And all of these are, have certain strengths and weaknesses that match real-life cybersecurity content. This is a hacker card. And so hackers, they have strengths and weaknesses with their technical ability, with their talk. Talk is the ability to make deceptive emails and messages. If you're high-level talk, then it's very hard to figure out that you're being victimized in a social phishing attack. A low talk ability, that might be something like, hey, my brother's a prince in Nigeria, please send me $100,000 and you'll be a millionaire. That worked, by the way, on some people.
Oh my God.
And that's why people keep trying. And then there's hacker characteristics, and then characteristics for their rig, or for their equipment. The CPU power, the memory of the computer, and the input-output speed. So over time, we started experimenting with different approaches to art. Those of you who work with kids, I mean, art is so important because it gives that moment of, I don't know how to describe it, wow, that moment. That's how I talk about it in papers, the wow moment. So I started looking at art and making cards to test. As we tested the game, we're also testing art. What kind of reaction do kids have, and why? These are all different types of cards that we printed over time. I was interested in trying to take an approach that might be something like Black Panther, Wakanda, and when that film came out, I thought, well, Afrofuturism might work very well. So I started making cards and printing cards to try to get reactions from kids and to try to see what works really well for engagement in the story and in the game and the collectability of the cards and so forth. So eventually I got an artist to finish up the different images on the cards. We were very concerned in lining things up because if you ever watch people play these games, the alignment of things are important. So this is a hacker card, and the hacker card here is complemented by a resource card. And the resource card makes your rig stronger, or it might give you training that makes your talk or something else stronger. So here you can see the relationship between tech here being added to tech. So this hacker here, Alpha Hacker, has a tech of 3. With this resource, by adding another router, you can have a tech of 5. The same thing for data and so on. There's different types of viruses that attack and do different things. And again, these are mapped onto real-life viruses and cybersecurity threats. These yellow ones, the yellow doesn't come out well here, but those are resource cards, instruction interpreted cards are ones related to like what software does. This is an image of how this particular game is played. There's something called a main loop here. You begin by drawing cards. You then update, wget, ping, send mail, and request. And you play through these different stages while attacking and defending what your opponents are doing. It's an opponent game, but it's designed to be played by 2, 3, 4, or even more players. We found that many players it becomes a little bit unruly and the kids get distracted, but 3 or 4 players goes just fine. So again, we have the hackers complemented by resources with different types of attacks and defenses. So the game at this point is pretty much done. We've done enough of the testing of the game and how well it works. What we're still trying to learn is the content learning, and also we have an instrument for measuring engagement in the field of computer science, because we want people to be engaged in computer science, and we want them to learn something, of course, from this. I wrote 2 grants this summer trying to get support for making a mobile version of this game. Now we have, the concept, characters, full decks. We know that it all works. So now I want to make the video game, and I think a phone game would be good for this. This is not just for, or this approach of using card games is not just for cybersecurity content. There's other people doing it in other fields such as chemistry. This is a game called Molecules, the chemistry card game. And again, here they're sort of taking an approach of having different characters with different characteristics here mapped onto elements in the periodic table. So, so that's SciSec, my SciSec project. I wanted to make a few comments for those who are graduate students, and I think a couple of you took 502 with me, so bear with me if you've seen these before. But it's super useful in doing research, design-based research, to focus in on patterns. When you see a pattern, though, give the pattern a name, and give it a name that relates it to some sort of action that keeps happening over and over and over and over again. A shortcut to that is to use gerunds. I'm borrowing this from the late work of Barney Glaser, who made grounded theory, and he continued to do seminars for grounded theory up into his 80s. But if you use gerunds for them, it's super useful, using gerunds for codes so that you can identify latent patterns in actions that people are doing. So once you've named it, then it becomes like a thing, and you can apply it to other contexts, right? So there's mobbing behavior, and that's done by birds, and of course it's done by people. But once you've named it in a conceptual way, you can connect it to other kinds of concepts. So what are the stages of mobbing? What are the consequences of mobbing behavior in a department? or in a company, or among birds or insects. What co-varies with it? If you have more mobbing, there's less something else. So less mobbing, more of something else. What are the contexts that nurture mobbing or impede mobbing? What are the different types of mobbing? Can I build a typology of mobbing behavior? What are the contingencies related to it? If we have mobbing, we have something else. What causes the mobbing? What conditions are there? And so forth. So very, very useful name patterns. Here's a nice tool that I keep pointing people to because it's just too cool to be a secret. That is the periodic table of visualization methods. The periodic table of visualization methods. Google it, you'll find it instantly. This is a periodic table, obviously, but if you click on the individual elements of the chart, it will show you an example of a method for visualizing concepts or quantification approaches and so forth. For example, a graphic facilitation, a cartoon, a rich picture, a knowledge map, a learning map, an informal, and so forth. Very, very nice, useful tool. A couple of rah-rah points. You get better with practice. Don't just try, like do it, you know? Do it and be willing to make mistakes. You know, when I was going to school talking about the idea of a cybersecurity game, they were like, you know, we're not so sure. Do you want to teach kids how to hack? And I said, yes. You can't teach somebody cybersecurity without also teaching hacking. If you're learning karate, you can't just learn how to block punches. You have to punch. You have to kick and so forth. So just try it and be willing to make lots of mistakes, and then you fix that. That's iterative design. That's being in a design experiment. Work together with people. I don't know anything about cybersecurity. I don't know anything about art. I don't, you know, bring people together, and you can do really, really cool things and make each other happy while doing it. Be flexible and adaptive to different things that happen. Don't be so married to your design that you're not willing to throw whole parts of it away. When I was doing my dissertation, by the way, activity theory was kind of popular in the mind of Sacha Baron Cohen at the moment. So I said, okay, I'll do activity theory. So I started reading all this stuff, and it's very complicated reading. You know, this stuff written by, you know, Vygotsky and Leontev and others later on, and Yuri Engstrom and so forth. And I was a double major. So I did a PhD in instructional systems technology and in language education, which is now called literacy and culture or something. And there were very different people in these departments. So you had to do coursework and qualifying exams in the two fields, and then a dissertation that covers both and has committees from people from both departments. So I went to my language advisor, and he was really old school, and I'm talking about, yeah man, like this comes from Russia and it's really cool, and he's like, look, I really don't understand what you're talking about. And I said, you know, I don't either. And he laughed, but he also was happy that, you know, I showed contrition or whatever. But he said, look, this thing is not helping you. Why don't you get rid of it? And it ended up being a brand new day. That's not a dig at activity theory in any way, but be flexible with your work and be willing to throw things away. Another great example are the Tibetan monks who make sculptures out of sand, and they're amazing and beautiful, and then they just sweep them away. Like, don't be too attached to it. Or they make sculptures out of butter. Yeah. Anyway, be passionate about your work. It matters. 1 in 3 black males are going to prison. There's a juvenile detention center steps from here, like walking distance from here. This is huge, like, disasters happening all around us. Your work matters. Your work matters. Your work matters. Be reflective about it. Publish now. Publish now. Nothing helps your CV more than publishing. It's really the currency of the field. And don't be afraid to do it. And lastly, there's a saying in the Malay language that I've learned, sikit sikit lama lama jadi bukit, which means a little bit at a time builds a mountain. It's not the sprint, it's the marathon, right? So if you do 10 minutes of writing every day, 7 days a week, it's much better than a massive amount at infrequent times. I think I'm going to stop there. I don't have big data yet about this, but this is what we're doing this year on this project. Hopefully I'll get one of the other grants that I wrote, and we'll be making this into a video game. Very nice to meet you. I brought examples of the actual cards that we're using, and I'd be happy to talk to anybody more about the game or about my experiences with it. I'm particularly interested in talking to anybody who regularly plays competitive card games. So, nice to meet you.